We're here, we're queer, and we love the Lord. That's right, you're listening to Coming Out Christian, a podcast about life at the intersection of queer identity and Christian faith. This fun, faithful, and sometimes irreverent podcast is a production of Love Boldly, an Ohio-based nonprofit creating spaces where LGBTQIA+ people can flourish in Christianity. I'm one of your hosts, Siobhan Nelson, and my co-host is the Reverend Dr. Ben Hillscamp, Executive Director of Love Boldly. So join us, and let's find out who's coming out today. Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Coming Out Christian. I'm Siobhan Boyd Nelson, one of your hosts. I use she, her pronouns, and I am joined, as always, by the amazing...
Hey, y'all. I'm the Reverend Dr. Ben Hillscamp. I use he, they pronouns.
Hello, Reverend Dr. Ben. How are you today?
I am doing well, Siobhan. How are you?
I am loving the sunshine. I think
Amen.
spring is springing. We haven't actually gotten to that moment, but we're approaching it very quickly. I think some crocuses have come up in the yards of friends, so that's amazing. And now I want to bring in our guest. Our guest is the amazing Erin Upchurch. So let's get into it and let's actually give Erin the intro that she deserves. And we said this on the last episode, but my goodness, how amazing to get yet another amazing just guest here on a brand new podcast. Ben and I were so excited when she said yes. And that's because Erin Upchurch, her pronouns, is an integrative social work practitioner, nonprofit leader, and community lecturer in the OSU College of Social Work. She is a sought-after speaker and facilitator in the areas of leadership and organizational development, trauma recovery, and transformative justice as a framework for community and organizational practice. And amazing, just like an all-around amazing badass human being as well, I think is the way that we can sum up Erin. So Erin, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you both.
We like to start off our conversations with our guests by asking you to share your testimony. What has your life looked like at the intersection of queer identity and faith?
This is such a great question. And the moment you said testimony, I was taken back to testimony service. Right. So as a child, let me back up. As I think in most Black families, Christianity is like the foundation. And so I don't recall the first time we ever went to church, but I know that like God and spirituality and Jesus has always been clear in my home. I do recall probably maybe middle school, I started going to a church. It was a Methodist church. And sorry, my cat is like in my business. And I remember I used to catch like the church van or bus to go to this Methodist church. And interestingly, I don't recall any direct like, oh, I'm saved now. Or it was just, I loved being there and I loved what it represented. And then when I was around 15, my mom and my sisters and I started going to a local evangelical-ish church. And I was like on the praise and worship team and like really began to understand the Bible as, I don't even know, not a rule book, but I'm a writer, right? And I love stories and I love context, and it just made sense to me. And then I went to college, and after my first year of a lot of fun, I refocused. Remember what I was, going to college for, and I joined a gospel choir and joined the Church of God in Christ. And for those who are not familiar, it is, from my perspective, the epitome of evangelical Pentecostal fire and brimstone holy roller, all the words, sanctification. That is Church of God in Christ. At least when I was a part of that for about 5 or 6 years. And that's when I really felt like I understood the rules of being a Christian and loving God and being sanctified and holy and set apart and, not doing things of the world. And I taught Sunday school, and I, you know, I never experienced feeling so broken and held by something as I did during that time. And even being in the gospel choir, we traveled with my Eastern Michigan University Gospel Choir, and just the possibility of whole sacredness and like where you could go in that collective, and like that was my community. Almost every single day we were in church. Um, and I got married way too young. But that's what you do in church, right? Like you meet somebody within 6 months. We
Yeah.
got married. Um, I was in my missionary training, evangelist training. My ex-husband was a minister, so like very much primed to be a pastor's wife, and all this
Hmm.
matters in a moment. I, part of the women's, all the things, and we moved back to Ohio after I got married. I was in Michigan at the time. And I was pregnant with my firstborn, and my husband decided that he didn't want to be married anymore. So
Mm.
we lived here about a month and 5 months pregnant. And I was like, oh. And so then, like, he left. And I was here back in a city I hadn't been in for many years, and I felt lonely. And I remember reaching
Hmm.
out to my church folks in Michigan, and like they were supportive, but it wasn't like what I was thinking was going to happen. And I realized at that moment, like, I don't know who I am. I have no idea who I am. I had this
Hmm.
identity, which was in Christ, right? Born again, sanctified, holy, all these things. But like, I had no clue who I was.
Yeah.
And so I started to really reorganize my relationship to God, and like, who are you? What are you? What is all of this about? Can I say I'm a Christian? What, like all of that. And since then, this was in 2001, I've really been in this practice of understanding God as everything and nothing, and me and me, and seeing God in all the things. And when I think about Jesus, and I think about the John 3:16 and heaven and hell, and I'm like, oh, we've missed the mark as a people. And whether Jesus, whether people say it was a story or not, like, I rock with Jesus. I feel like we would be good friends. And I understand his perspective. And that really, for me, is about, that's my hook. Like, what's possible when you can see outside of what's in front of you, when you believe. I was just talking to my wife yesterday, like, I have this, all my needs have been met, or always met. And one thing I think I'll end here is, I remember, because I was also intertwined with Assemblies of God and all the evangelical folks in the 90s and early 2000s. And I realized that Black folks seemed to praise God for what he could do, and the white folks praised God for who he was. And that has never not sat with me, of like, who is God, and using even as a father. But I have a whole theory about God and they them, and like, it's just shifted, and I've never felt more authentic in my spirituality and in my practice than I do now, even comparative to being in church 7 days a week.
That's beautiful, Erin. That is absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. I can relate to so many aspects of that testimony. But I want to focus on something you said, that, you shifted, or your relationship with God shifted. And I know you in many aspects and in many ways, but one of the ways that I gained an enormous amount of respect for you was through your transformative justice work. And when you say that your faith shifted, it reminds me of the word transformation and your work on transforming things and how my understanding of transformative justice is that we don't leave things behind. We
Mm.
allow things to evolve. We honor the sacred and the good in things. We don't just throw them by the wayside. And it sounds like you could have easily thrown this faith by the wayside, right? I mean, your minister husband left you pregnant.
Yeah.
Very easy to throw this faith that was so integral to that relationship by the wayside. So could you just talk about that transformation and how that transformation came about or what sparked that for you?
Yeah. I have a really vivid image of writing in my journal during that time and like getting clear about me, the truth about who I am, and just what's true in general. What do I like? What brings me joy? What makes me feel most alive? What am I tethered to that doesn't make sense? And really fumbling through and attempting to get to know those parts and understanding. I think I had this understanding then, which I can articulate now, was around like getting to the root of things. Like the surface is just the surface. There's always something more, and getting underneath things with people and systems and establishments and like, where's the life? Let me find the life here. Let me follow that heartbeat. And again, 20 plus years ago, I didn't have this language, but that's what I was doing. And I'm a social worker. And my work has been all neatly wrapped up, maybe not as neatly, but around getting to what's true, what's here, what are the right questions, um, what are we feeling, what am I feeling in my body, what are others feeling, and also what else is possible. And that sense of possibility, like that is where my hope lies, is in what's possible, not in people, not in gimmick and rules and all of that, but I know that I know that another world that is possible, because the Bible tells me so, right? Because God, because source, because universe tells me so. And when I think about the rhythm of life, nature, you talked about plants blooming and the bird, like I think about all this that happens around us, and I'm like, yeah, of course something else is possible. We don't have to be stuck. Birds fly south. We don't have to be stuck. Butterflies migrate, and the very essence of the world, like there's a rhythm to it, and it's just kind of tapping into that rhythm. And I think I'll add to that too is I'm also a student of polarity, which is like an energy practice. It's similar to Reiki in terms of the body work, um, but it's about being able to transform and move energy around for our healing ultimately. But one of the principles is that life is an evolutionary process, and I remember being like, oh my God, we're never stuck. We feel stuck. I have felt stuck plenty of times in my life. We're never stuck. And to me, it all just goes together. And like, we're always just movement. There's always somewhere to go, something else to do. We don't have to stay where we are. And for me, when I think about transformative justice and just transforming as a person, there's always something else possible. And that doesn't mean that we're on this, I'm always trying to like do work per se. Sometimes you just sit and let it integrate. But it's about a bigger framework for me of there's more here than what I can see. And it's also really just all right in front of me. That both and zero absolutes. And
Ben did,
let
oh,
me
go
add
ahead, Erin.
there is I think about the collective too. Like I am an introvert. I am decidedly not a joiner. So you will not see me as part of groups. That's just not my thing. And I understand of community. I've never been a person that's been a joiner per se, but there's something about the collective that I find so seductive and so powerful. Because when we all come together and we can unify around and in spite of differences without sanitizing our differences, that's the thing. There's something
Hmm.
so unholy in that. And when, again, excuse me, when you look at nature, that is the collective, right? The trees, the birds, the ground, the weather, all of it is a collective, and it's an interdependence that I really have great reverence for, and to me that does play a part in our overall transformation.
Yeah, when you say collective, and I know that you are a community person, right? And that you thrive in community despite being an introvert. Actually, I don't think those two things are necessarily in opposition. We often believe that they are, but you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but do you have a church home, or is this collective, is this ability to recognize the sacred in nature all around you, is that essentially your church?
That's such a great question. I do not have an official church home. I don't know. I used to attend a Unitarian Universalist church years ago, and I even taught Sunday school there. I'm always a teacher, but I do not have a church home. I have been known to say that my work is my spirituality, and in a lot of ways, it is. Um, but yeah, I definitely would say, and this is important too, because there was a time when it was like Christianity, the Bible, like that's it, nothing else can be part of the canon and the dogma. And I have since expanded into, spells and prayers. What's the difference? It's the source, right? And understanding how herbalism and intention setting and what basically what most would call witchcraft, like fine, call it what you want, but you know what, I'm doing the same thing. I've laying hands, oils, all of that. And so understanding the ways to utilize nature and what's available and and I have gifts. I've got gifts of discernment and the word of knowledge, and that fivefold ministry, like I've got those things. And so that truly is home for me. And then I have these pockets of folks that are in those practices as well. um yeah, that's such a good question.
Now, you said something that I want to ask you about because you said your work is your spirituality, and you work in a decidedly queer space. And so, have you ever said that in a workspace that your work is your spirituality? And I want to say out loud that I often, when I was in related spaces and in doing queer community work, I also consider that work part of my ministry, my personal ministry, as part of caring for God's children, as a person of faith. And I was doing that in a very particular way through my job. But also saying that in that space is not necessarily I would tell all of my colleagues or all of my folks that I was working with. So, what has been your relationship with being an out person of faith in these decidedly queer, progressive spaces?
So when I say my work, I definitely mean work with a capital W, not what I do every day, not my role. And I didn't always understand the difference between that. It's it's becoming, and as I get older too, I'm more aware of how um, collectively as queer and trans folks, people are like absolutely not to anything related to God or spirituality, although they're still practicing something. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But I'm aware of that, and I don't, it doesn't come up often. It does in spaces, like I was at a conference last year and it was around ritual and spirituality and queer spaces. And like that was an open and it was a fantastic conversation. But for me, the work is bigger. What I'm doing now at KYC and some other stuff is an offering from that well and that source. But the work of creating opportunities for people to experience belonging, being so deeply authentic. And the more authentic I am, the deeper I get into it, the more true my work is. And that to me is a spiritual practice because woo, it's some stuff in here. You know, and so that work, being a truth teller across all the time. But then also, Siobhan, I think with me and you, because we've known each other, I don't know, 15 plus years, and
Yeah.
at a space where we didn't talk and we didn't have community and we weren't connected. And I think that was a spiritual practice too, that we found each other again.
Hmm.
The room was there for that to exist and amongst others. And I think in queer community, as much as we depend on each other, we're not always kind and we don't give each other grace. And sometimes
Hmm.
people, you know, cancel or cut off or move on. And it's still finding the dignity in those spaces. And like we're all really just trying to figure it out. And we are going to fumble and we're going to mess up. And also, we're coming from a place where people told us who we were was not okay.
Right.
How in the world do we step outside every day when we have been in our bones taught that we didn't deserve to be alive, to love, or that we were going to this place of hell? I don't know how we're supposed to function, but we're not doing it well. And I don't know how we
True.
could. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Ben, did you have any questions? I don't want to steal all of Erin's
No,
time.
no, no, you're perfectly fine. I'm not sure how much I have a question as I have a bit of an observation. I've sort of been tracking on our conversation. Erin, you said earlier something to the effect of um, Black people focus on what God can do, whereas white people focus on who God is. And I've been thinking about a similar statement about the fact that Black people, Black Christians particularly, tend to focus on doing church, whereas white Christians tend to focus on going to church.
Mm.
And I guess I would argue that shows up more, and I've seen it shown up more in marginalized Christians tend to focus on doing church. And I guess what I
Hmm.
hear when you've been talking is a lot of doing church. However we define church, whether that's prayers or spells or lighting candles or evangelization or whatever, that all works in that very broad collective of doing church, doing spirituality rather than just simply showing up and, going through the motions for an hour or however long sermons may be in certain traditions, Siobhan. This is a running joke, but by the way, between Siobhan and I, between my home church that did not permit clapping and the experiences that Siobhan had growing up in a very different church environment.
Yes,
Uh,
Erin, be appalled. Be appalled with
oh,
me.
I'm appalled. I'm appalled. Um, I'm appalled about how our church was run. Anyway, but I've been tracking that as we've been talking that this is all doing again whatever we call church, spirituality, faith, etc. It is not limited to where we are. It's not limited to where we go or who even we perceive God to be. It is or what God is doing. It's really on doing this thing we call faith.
Yeah. And then I think to piggyback on that, Erin, you talked about finding space within the Kojic Church and the Assemblies of God, and there are a lot of rules, right? There are so many rules against jewelry and makeup and hat wearing
Long
and how
skirt.
you. Yeah, the length of your skirt and what you wore. And my understanding is that you were into those rules, Erin. And I know that when you are living, part of my deconstruction and reconstruction of my faith was understanding why those rules didn't have to apply to my life anymore personally, but then also looking at my community and not trying to apply rules to my community and not policing other people's faith. That is a maturity thing for me and my faith because and I think you've talked about this, especially in your practice. Queer faith often looks different because it has to, because it comes from a different place, because it's had to be deconstructed and reconstructed. These practices might look different than and might not follow the rules that so many of us were taught as part of our faith. How did you break through that and get over that hump? Because that's been a That's been a growing edge for me. I think I'm on the other side of it now, but as someone who has a similar background, how did you get through that?
I'm still getting through it. I remember very vividly the first time I put on a pair of pants. Once, this is in 2001. I, I was like, I hadn't worn pants for like 6 years. And I think one thing about the rules is, and I think this all plays a bigger part in the bigger vision and the understanding is just like basketball, teams wear uniforms because you're part of that team. And I understood a lot of those rules as this is the team I play for right now. And also, as an athlete, there's rules of how you treat your body, what you do when you go to bed, all of that. And so all of that was around, I think the scripture on perfecting your holiness and the whole being sanctified and set apart. It was to support that. And so I can look back and be like, oh, I get it. And that they weren't all wrong. I'm not gonna lie. Some of that I'm like, that was the way that it was communicated sucked. And if you had, and I'm a person like, well, why? Tell me, I maybe it could have stuck with other folks. But
Hmm.
the biggest ones, so first was to unpack around the clothing and dressing and makeup and things of that nature. So even now, I didn't put a hoodie on or a sweatshirt. I have on like a cami, and I still to this day I'm like, oh my god, my arms are exposed, and I have to move on from that. In the summer, even I started wearing shorts probably about 2 or 3 years ago. I'm 47. Just for context, so 2 or 3 years ago, I was like, I can wear shorts again. So
Wow. Yeah.
that's those kind of those external things, because back to the doing church, it was a lot of external things, but I think on the inside I'm consistently, I get hooked in gender stuff, and not like trans on binary, but like roles and relationships and the masculine and the feminine, and being able to zoom out around the divinity in it versus like this is supposed to happen here, and the polarity of all that. So that is something I'm consistently deconstructing. What is this supposed to look like? Nature is very queer. There's very trans.
It
So I
is. Yeah.
am question that. Like, of course we exist. Of course we do. Um, I and then I think around the spiritual practices. And so in some of the ritual, I just feel, I think I still feel shy around some of the practices because it was not allowed or not okay. And then the other piece is with my children. I didn't raise my children under any specific faith practice per se. Yes,
Hmm.
with me. So they picked it up and they have it. But I never said, you must be a Christian. You must do this. Because, and that maybe was an overcorrection because I didn't feel like I had a choice. And so watching them kind of figure it out on their own is really beautiful. But every now and then I'm like, oh, did I mess up by not
Heard.
telling them who God is supposed to be to them,
Right.
but show them who God can be? And those very different. And that is not how I was raised. So, unpacking those kind of like the nuances of it. Oh, and then one more thing I remember, it was in 2006. I went to a concert. It was a Sweet Water, I think, concert. It was here in Columbus. Erica Badu, Jill Scott, Queen Latifah,
Ooh.
MC Light,
Ooh.
Poetry. Right. It was outside. I remember being there, secular concert, and Jill Scott was singing. And it was the first time I'd ever had an emotional, like, oh, it's not just gospel music that does this, but music does this.
Yeah.
Oh, and I remember that so vividly. And so, like, there's all these iterations as I just continue to grow through life. And because I do, I'm into end of life care right now and as an end of life doula. And um, so now I'm in that space of what happens when we die?
Hmm.
Where do we go? What does it mean to sit with someone in some of those most sacred parts of life? Because we don't have those answers. And so that is what I'm probably most presently unpacking is afterlife, what that looks like.
Wow. And that's a lot of unpacking and transforming to do there with that afterlife work. Erin, this has been absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, we can't just keep you
I know.
forever and keep talking and talking, though I would absolutely love to, and we'll definitely have you back on as a guest. But let's go ahead and move into our query of the day. And I think that we've talked a lot about a lot of transformative moments in your faith. And so I actually want to think about something that hasn't transformed. Is there anything from your faith that maybe or has had less of a transformation, or maybe even if it has transformed in some ways, maybe less of a drastic transformation than other parts of your faith? Ben, do you want to start us off?
Sure. That's hard for me because I feel like so much of my background, so much of my, church going, etc., has just radically changed from the Roman Catholicism of the first 19-ish years of my life. Um, I honestly, I think just church attendance, being part of a church community, um, particularly between high school, the end of high school, and maybe my last position in higher ed before I moved back to Ohio. I attended church in six different denominations, including UUism, lots of different congregations, lots of different expressions of Christianity or Christian adjacent, um, but always being a member, not always the best member of some sort of congregation. That is something that was just, it was the non-negotiable for me growing up. And it was just something that I always wanted to have at least the semblance of.
Great. Yeah. You are a very dedicated church attender, actually, even apart from being a pastor and a reverend doctor. That is something I've always known about you, Ben, I believe. I think for me, one thing that has not transformed, actually, a lot of my faith has not transformed. I still believe a lot of what I believed. I am probably still would say I am mostly Pentecostal apostolic, and have a lot of those same core beliefs. I still believe in speaking in tongues and the laying on of hands. There's I guess I would say it hasn't been watered down, right? Like all of those more maybe radical parts of my faith remain radical, but I think also remain fully in alignment with the rest of my life. And so I have transformed how I got to those things and what I believe about those things. But those parts of my faith and those parts of my practice are still very much there and a big part of it. Erin, anything that comes
Mm,
up for you?
yes. Um, I think definitely kind of what you were just sharing on the laying on of hands. And that has not, what has transformed for me is the expansion of where that's available and how
Hmm.
there are still folks I will never let put their hands on me. And never, so I'm still very mindful of that and energy and the spirituality piece. But I've, I've never questioned that as a possibility. I would also say, scripture is it's so deeply embedded in my bones because I grew up in it, and I can quote something almost for anything, and like I still lean on that, and I still utilize it, and it still reminds me of what's true. And I think the last thing is, the Bible says that we're a peculiar people, and we are called to be set apart and different, and we're called to stand for what's right and what's true. And that is such a foundation of who I am and my practice and the spiritual practice of the work. And um, I I can credit my time in church with that because
Yeah.
it gave me the courage to do that in community. And now as I continue to get older and mature, and my dad always said don't be afraid to stand alone, and like I can still pull on all of that I have a practice in doing that. So um yeah, those are probably the main things.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And now the Reverend Dr. Ben is going to share with us a moment in queer Christian history. Not only have we always been here, but we have always been here in the church. What do you have for us today, Ben?
So anyone who studies even a little bit of the intersection between Christianity and the LGBTQIA plus community knows about the metropolitan community of churches. These were the first stable denomination to specifically serve the LGBTQIA plus community. But what a lot of folks don't know, because it only existed for a short time, is that the MCCs are actually not the first denomination to do that work. In 1946, Archbishop George Hyde founded what was known for a very brief time as the Episcopal Catholic Communion. It had no affiliation with the Episcopal Church or the Catholic Church, but it was a small group of mostly white male ministers and members in New York City who were largely LGBTQ, and who provided a space for LGBTQ folks, again, at least in New York City, that was truly Christian, and truly queer, and fully acknowledged the queerness and the holiness of their members. Again, it was shortly lived, but they engaged up through the time of the Stonewall riots, and then ceased as an organization, I believe, in the 1980s. But they represent the first LGBTQ affirming denomination here in the US.
Wow. Okay. Good stuff. All the way back in 1946. Wonderful. Thank you for that, Ben.
Totally.
All right, y'all. That brings us to the end of another episode. It has been an amazing conversation with the amazing Erin Upchurch. Erin, thank you so much for being here. Is there anything that you would like to plug here? Social media, events, organization, take it away.
I'm so bad at this part. My wife will tell you. I will tell you that we have a business called the Ohio Rest Collective, which provides strategies and really trying to promote sustainable transformation through the principles of rest. Check out our website, the Ohio Rest Collective.com. That's really it. I just moved to the world. I'm a simple girl.
A simple girl. Okay, yeah. Erin. Okay.
Collective, right? Says no one. But even on our Facebook page, we've got some practices that we, in partnership with the Greater Columbus Arts Council, offering some yoga and movement and breathwork and somatic stuff this year. And so that should be posted later this week throughout the year. And we love for folks to join us.
Oh, I am going to recommend that folks get into that. I am all about rest in 2025, particularly for our marginalized folks. So if you are queer identified, Black identified, living at the intersection, please take advantage of these amazing resources. I know Erin and her wife, and their energy is just amazing. Being in their presence is amazing. So I can't even imagine what doing energy work with them and it would be like. So yeah, get into it, folks. The OhioRestCollective.com. All right. Ben, anything that you need to plug here at the end going on?
No, this has just been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, then that'll take us to the end of our episode. Everyone, get out there, enjoy that spring weather, and then join us next time for another episode of Coming Out Christian.
Thank you for listening to Coming Out Christian with Siobhan Boyd Nelson and me, Ben Hillscamp. Do you want to see content like this continue to be produced? Then please support Love Boldly with a donation and consider becoming a monthly donor. You can donate online at www.loveboldly.net/donate. Join us next time as we continue to engage with people who proudly say that we're here, we're queer, and we love the Lord. and we're not going anywhere.